Welcome to this channel, and in this video we're going to be looking at Cambridge Igcse October-November 2023 paper 058030. Let's go right into the first question. The first question says, write down the letter of the shape that is congruent to the given shape. Right? So if you hear the word congruent, it implies that the given shape has the same size as the other shape, the same shape and size as the other shape. So in this case, this is the shaded shape, right? And then if you look at shape A, you see that it is wider than the shaded shape, and you can see that the width is, you can see how far apart it is, right? You see that it's larger than what is here. So this is not congruent to the shaded shape, right? Sorry. Then for the shape B, you can see that it is longer. If we count in terms of square units, we have 1, 2, 3. In this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. It's getting to 5, right? It is longer. It's not the same size. So this is not congruent to it. If we look at the next one, you can see that it's also longer than this and smaller in size. That's in terms of the width, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is just 1, 2, 3. So this is not congruent. And then in this case, you can see that it has the same height, the same length, 1, 2, 3 units, and the same width, right? The only difference is that the upper part of the shape, right, this upper part of the shape is wider than this, the given shape. You can see how wide it is, so it's not congruent. Well, in the case of this shape over here, which is shape D, you can see that the length is what? You can see 3 units of length. The width is the same, just like the given shape, and then you can see that the two ends of the shape lies in between the two squares, just like in the case of the shaded shape, right? Same thing here, right? The two squares that are here, these two bases lie on it. The only difference between these two shapes is that they are on different positions, but it's the same size, same shape. So that is the congruent shape. So the answer is D. So in the given region, that's what you will then write down is what the second question says. Write down all the factors of 32, right? And you hear such questions, you can tell you write down all the factors of a given number. All you simply need to write down are those numbers that can easily go into, that's divide those numbers without the number given without remainder. So in the case of 32, it is important for you to know that the factors of every single number will always have 1 in it, right? And then after that, we have 2, we have 4, we have 8, we have 16, we have 32, because these numbers divide 32, right, without what remainder, right? All other numbers, for example 7, you can see 7 is a factor of 32, right? Because 32 divided by 7 will leave you with a remainder, so it's not included. So these are the factors of 32, and that is the answer. Then the B part of the question says the reciprocal of 1 over 8. So when you're asking the exam, if you're asking an exam, find the reciprocal of a number. It's simply 1 divided by the number, right? So in this case, what number are we given? 1 over 8. So what we're going to have is going to be 1 divided by 1 over 8. So that's going to be equal to what? And you should know that when you're carrying out a division, what are you going to do? You're going to change the sign to a multiplication sign, and then you're going to change things up, right? Switch things. So that's 1 over 8 becomes 8 over 1, right? So that's 1 times 8, which is 8. So the reciprocal of 1 over 8 is 8. Next question says the value of the 7 in the number 473285. So you should know the place value system. So starting from the lowest, we have 473285. So the last is the unit, tens, right? The hundreds, the thousands, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, right? So 7 falls under the tens of thousands, the tens of thousands. So you could simply say that the value of 7 in the number 473285 is what? 70,000. You could say 10,000. Sorry, 10,000. Or you could write it in words, 10,000. Or you could say 70,000. That's the place, that's the value of 7 in that number. Next question says, Draw the lines of symmetry on these rhombus. So it's important that you understand the meaning of the term line of symmetry. It's simply that line that divides a shape into two equal halves such that when it's after division, you can see that one side is a mirror of the other, right? Just like a reflection. So for a rhombus, it's important for you to know that it has two lines of symmetry. One that cuts across, that's one diagonal, and then another, right? Because in the case of the first one, you could see that when you are giving the exam, just if you use a ruler or you just trace it this way up. So these are the two lines of symmetry, right? Because when you draw this over, this side is a mirror of this, right? And in the case of the other line, you can see it mirroring. So these are the two lines of symmetry, right? Next question says, from the list of numbers 61, 63, 64, 66, 68, 69. From this list, write down a cube number, right? So what's a cube number? It's a number, right, that is formed from a number multiplied by itself twice, right? So it's formed from a number, right? So, and if you practice the cubes of maybe the first 15 natural numbers, you would know that 4 times 4 times 4 is 64, which implies that the cube root of 64 is 4, right? So one important fact here is that the output is going to be what? A whole number, right? So in this case, the answer is going to be what? 64. That's a cube number. So to carry out a test, you could simply get the cube roots of all the numbers given to you, right? Cube roots. And then if you test each of these values, you would notice that each other value other than 64 is going to give you a fractional output. It's going to be decimal like, right? And then in the case of the third root of 64, that's the cube root, is going to be simply 4, right? It's not going to be fractional anyway, right? So it's going to be 64. Then B says a prime number. So what's a prime number? It's a number with one factor, two factors, sorry, that's 1 and itself, right? 1 and itself. 1 and itself. So looking at the list of numbers we have 61, we have 63. So you can see that 64, first of all, is divisible by 2, so it has more than 2 factors. 66, same, it's divisible by 2, right? 68 is divisible. It's divisible by more than 2 numbers, which is 1 itself, right? Other numbers. 69 is divisible by 3, right? In the case of 61, you see that it doesn't obey any divisibility rule, right? It doesn't obey, and then that implies 61 just has 2 factors, 1 and itself, which is 61. So the prime number here is 61. Next question says, Tara goes on a journey by train. The train leaves at 6:48. The journey takes 12 hours and 35 minutes. Find the time when Tara arrives. So that's not hard. All you simply need to do, we're talking about hours, we're talking about minutes. So you simply place the hour and then the minute here, right? So what you have is that the train leaves at 6:48, right? So the hours place 6, the minutes place 48. And then the journey takes 12 hours 35 minutes. So that's a plus, and then 12 hours 35 minutes. So the question now says, find the time when Sarah arrives. So please pay close attention here. So if you add these two values together, 8 plus 5 is 13, right? So 8 plus 5, 13, 3. You move 1 over. 1 plus 4, 5. 5 plus 3, 8. And then 18, 83. So this is not the final answer because you can see that the minutes place is having 83. And it's important to know that, well, I guess you must have known that 60 minutes equals 1 hour, right? So we could get some hours from the minutes place. So since we have 83, we could split it to be 60 minutes plus 23 minutes, right? So we could say that 83 minutes is equal to 1 hour because we said 60 minutes, 1 hour, right? So 1 hour plus 23 minutes. So what do we write over down here? So we write 23 minutes over here and then carry over the 1 hour to the hours place. So it becomes, you add 1 to the hours place, so 1 plus 6, 7, 7 plus 12, that's 19. So this is the correct answer. So that's 19:23 p.m. or you could say 7:23 p.m. because it's same as this is the 24-hour standard. So you could simply say 24 minus, right, 24 minus 7, stuff like that. Right, so this is the system for that. So you could either say 19:23 p.m., which is still same as 7:23 p.m. That's in the 12-hour standard, right? Okay. Question 6 says, Jamie records the masses of two samples of oranges, type A and type B. The stem and leaf diagram shows the masses in grams of each of the 30 oranges of type A. So A says complete the table to show the range for type A oranges. If you've watched my previous videos, we said that range is simply the difference between the highest and the lowest values, right, in the data set. So the highest value minus the lowest value. So we should be able to interpret this stem and leaf diagram, take into note that this is the stem, this is the leaf, right? And then you can see the key given in the question. We have 17.6 representing 176 grams. So looking at the stem, right, and the leaf part, we can see that the lowest here is 176, right? After 176 we have 178, 178, 179. So it keeps increasing as we move on, right? So the lowest is 176. Then what's the highest? When we move down here, we see 2-1. This 2-1, this is 21 as the stem, 1 as the leaf. So that's 211 gram, and then 215, then 216, then 218. That's the highest. So the highest, which is 218 grams, negative of the lowest, which is 176, and that's equal to 42. And that's simply the range. The highest minus the lowest value. So we simply place 42 here. So the B part of the question says, use the information in the table to write down two comments comparing the masses of type A oranges with the masses of type B oranges. So studying the table carefully, you could see two things here. We could use the mean and the range to draw two different inferences. The first one is, let's talk about the mean. We could see that the mean of the type A oranges is 195.7, and then for the type B oranges is 215.8. So we could say that on an average, right, because you know that the mean is same as average, right? So you could say on an average, the mass of type B oranges is less than that of type A oranges, because type A oranges 195.7, type B 215.8. So we could say on an average, the mass of type A oranges is less than that of type B oranges, because you can see that mean, this is the average mass of type A, 195.7, that's 195.7, in this case 215.7.8. So the mass on an average type B, the mass of type B oranges is greater than that of type A oranges, right? And type A is less than. Any of those statements will be accepted. Then in terms of the range, right, you should know that the range, you could call it a measure of dispersion or a measure of spread, right? Because in essence, we're simply calculating the value, that's the difference between the highest value and the lowest value. So that gives us an idea of how spread out the values are, right? Right, and that's efficient where you don't have outliers, right? So in this case, you can see that the range of type A oranges is 42 and that of type B is 35, and you can see that the range of type A oranges is greater than that of type B oranges. And when range is high, right, is high, that implies spread, right? That's higher spread. So we could simply say that the mass of type A oranges are more variable, or you could say less consistent, or you could say more spread out than that of the type B oranges, right? Than that of the type B oranges. So the second point is the fact that there is variability, there is spread, there is there is less consistency, right? So we have 42, in this case 35. So 42 implies more spread, more space between the oranges, because we're talking about 30 oranges each, right? So it's the same number of oranges, right? So if we have the same number of oranges, and then we're seeing that the difference between the first and that's the highest and the lowest is 42 for type A, and for that of type B it's 35. That implies that there is more spread, right? There's less consistency. That's consistency is less in the type that's in the set of type A oranges. That's in terms of their masses. Okay. Question 7 says in triangle LMN, Ln is equal to 7.5 cm and Mn is equal to 8 cm. Using a ruler and compasses only, construct triangle LMN. Leave in your construction arcs. The line Ln has been drawn for you. Okay, we've been given that Ln is equal to 8 cm and that Mn is equal to 7.5. Is that right? Let's be sure. Ln is equal to 7.5, so sorry. Ln is equal to 7.5 and Mn is equal to 8 cm. So all you simply need to do here is, because question says using a pair of compasses only and ruler, right? So what happens is that you get the compass, right? And then first we have Mn as 8 cm. So you get the ruler and then measure out 8 cm, right? Let's see here it's 8 cm. And then tip of the compass is here, and then the other part is here. So you measure out 8 cm, and then you place the tip at this point, M, and then you've measured out 8 cm, right? And then you make an arc with the compass. You make an arc, right? Through that distance, you make an arc, and that corresponds to the 8 cm. Then you move to L. Remember from the question says Ln is equal to 7.5. So what you do next is you adjust the distance between the compass parts, right? That's the two parts in this part's in essence. So you then reduce it to 7.5. So the distance between the two parts of the compass is now 7.5. So you place the tip here, right? That's not your pencil, right? Over here. And then you make a kind of like an arc. That's 7.5. So they're gonna meet at a point, right? So then you get your ruler and draw a straight line that meets that point exactly, right? And then same here, a straight line that meets that point exactly, and this point is what you're gonna call N, right? Now we've been told that Mn is 8 cm and this part is 7.5 cm, right? So this is the construction. This is just a sketch. I don't have the measuring instruments over here, but giving you a good description of what you are supposed to do. Okay, so B part says write down the mathematical name for this type of triangle. So you know we have three types of triangles. We have the equilateral, the isosceles, and the scalene, right? And in this case, we have 8 cm, we have 7.5 cm, right? And then when the length of ML is measured, you would see that it's not equal to Mn and it's not equal to Ln. And when the three sides of a triangle don't have equal sides, or in the case of isosceles, you just have to have two sides equal, the other unequal. So when all are not equal, what we have is a scalene triangle, right? So this is a scalene triangle. 8th question says, the surface area of a cube is 73.5 cm squared. Find the length of one side of the cube. So if we should visualize this, for you to have a clearer understanding, right, you should know that a cube is a figure, right, that has square faces. Very important. Square faces. unlike the cuboid which has rectangular faces. So, and there's 6 faces, right? One, you have 1 up, you have 2, this is 3, this is 4, right? You have the 5 and then the 6th one, right? By the side. So you have 6 faces, and then each of these faces you have a square, right? Of length L. I know that the area of a square is equal to L squared. So you have 6 faces, so that implies that the surface area is gonna be equal to L squared. 6 times L squared, because you have 6 faces, so 6 times L squared. So since we're given that the surface area of the cube is 73.5, what we simply do is 6L squared is equal to 73.5, because the question says find the length of one side, so we're looking for L. So if we divide through by 6, L squared is equal to 73.5 divided by 6, which is 12.25. So now to get a value of L, we find the square root of both sides, right? And then square root of L squared is L. Square root of 12.25 is 3.5. So that implies that the length of one side of the cube is 3.5 cm. Right? Next question says, the diagram shows an equilateral triangle. Find the value of x. Right? So this is an equilateral triangle. You can see that the markings over here which indicate that all sides are equal. Right? And if all sides are equal, all angles are equal, right? So that, and with these indications, you can see all sides are equal. So here's A. Let's say here's A, right? So that means that A plus A. Remember that the sum of angles in a triangle sums to 180, right? So 3A is equal to 180, and A is equal to 60 degrees. So that implies that each angle here is 60. So we could replace A over here with 60 degrees. So what we have in essence is this. We have this, right? X, and then we have X, and then we have 60, right? And this is a point. This is a point. And it's important to note that angles at a point sum to 100, 360 degrees, right? Angles in a straight line sum to 180. Angles at a point sum to 360 degrees. So what we're going to have is 60 plus, we have x over here, x plus x will be equal to 360 degrees, right? So x plus x is 2x, so we have 60 plus 2x equals 360, then 2x is equal to 360 negative 60, and then 2x is equal to 300, and then dividing through by 2, x will be equal to 300 divided by 2, which is equal to 150 degrees, right? And that's the value of x. Right? Next question says, A is equal to 4, 9, 4, 9, and then B is equal to negative 6, 1, and then we're to add. So if we're adding these two together, what we simply do is to add this to this, this to this. So 4 negative 6 is negative 2, right? And then 9 plus 1 is that means we're adding 4 to negative 6. That's 4 plus negative 6. And plus negative is negative, so 4 negative 6, negative 2. Then 9 plus 1 is 10. Right? Sorry. Excuse me. So negative 2, 10. Right? So that's the value of A plus B. So we just add each component accordingly. This to this, this to this, right? And then we add them. The next question says 3C, and we're given C as 30 negative 2. Right? So what we simply do is 3 into, because we're asked for 3C, 13 negative 2. And when we're carrying out such an operation, this is just like a vector. You're going to multiply up and down by 3. Both are affected. So 3 times 13 and 3 times negative 2, right? So that's 3 times 13 is 39, and 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. So what we're going to have here is negative, sorry, let me clean that up, not negative 39, right? So we're going to have there is 39 and negative 6. 39 negative 6, okay, that's it. So that's the value of 3C. So when we're multiplying by a scalar, ensure that up and down, multiply. Question 11 says factorize completely 15v squared negative 3v, right? One thing you can see here is that you have a v here, you have a v here, right? And then another thing is that 3 is common here, right? Because 3 is divisible by 15, right? 15 can divide 3 really, and 3 can divide itself, right? So 3 is a common factor, and v is also a common factor, right? Because there's v here, there's v here, there's v squared here, there's no v squared here. So we're going to have is 3v into, because that's the common factor, and then 15v squared divided by 3v is going to be 15 divided 3 is 5, and v squared divided v, we're going to be left with 1v. So that's into 5, right, v, and then negative 3v divided by 3v is going to be 1, right? So that is equal to 3v into 5v negative 1, and that's the factorization, a complete factorization. Question 12 says, Grandma asks a group of students how they travel to school. The table shows the probability of how a student chosen at random travels to school. So for the bus, we have 0.4, for a walk 0.32, for a car 0.17, and then other. So the question says complete the table, right? So this is very easy. So it's important to note that in a situation of events, right, containing that you're looking at all possible outcomes, the sum of the possible probabilities must equal 1. Just like if you say, what's the probability that you're going to get a head in a coin, that's in a fair coin, is going to be half. So if the probability of a head is half, while the probability of a tail is also half, right? And then the sum of these probabilities is going to be what? 1, right? So the sum total of all probabilities must equal 1. So what are you simply going to have? Let's say that this is x, right? So it's going to be 0.4 plus 0.32 plus 0.17 plus x is equal to 1. So if we add the first three values, 0.4 plus 0.32 plus 0.17 is going to be okay, so if we add 0.4 plus 0.32 plus 0.17, we have 0.89. So what we have is 0.89 plus x is equal to 1. So we subtract 0.89 from both sides, and then what we have is 0.89 plus x, negative 0.89 is equal to 1 negative 0.89. And 1 negative 0.89 is equal to 0.11, right? So that's the value of x. So sorry. Okay, that's the value of x. We've gotten as 0.11. And then when you get something like this, ensure, always do auto cross check what you've written down, right? So by the time you then add these values together, do that again, add these values together, they should sum to 1, right? That's the value. So that's the value of x according to what I said from the onset. Okay, so question B says there are 1,800 students at a school. Find the expected number of students that walk to school. So this is easy. When you see questions like this, simply look at the table given, and in this case, we're looking at the expected number of students that walk to school. So the question is, what's the probability that a student walks to school? And that's 0.32. So the 0.32, which is the probability for every, right, out of every 32, that in this case 0.32, 32%, right? So 0.32 multiplied by the number of students in the school gives us the expected number of students. So 0.32 multiplied by 1,800 is equal to 576. So that implies that 576 students are expected to walk to school, right? Question 13 says, without using a calculator, work out 1 whole 5 over 6 divided by 11 divided 15. Okay, so you must show all workings and give your answer as a mixed number in its simplest form. So in the case of 1 whole 5 over 6, what we have here is 1 times 6, right? So 6 times 1, right? 6 times 1 plus 5 divided by 6. So 6 times 1 is 6, 6 plus 5, and 11 over 6. So we've converted it to, that's a fraction, right? A complete fraction. So that's going to be 11 over 6 divided by 11 divide 15, right? And then if we want to carry out the division, what happens here? We're going to change the sign. So it becomes a multiplication sign, but we're going to change things here. It's going to be 11 over 6 times 15 over 11, right? So you can see that 11 simply cancels out, and then what we left with is 15 over 6. And you can see that 3 is a factor of 15, is also a factor of 6. So 3 and 15 divides 3, we're going to have 5, right? And when 6 divides 3, we're going to have 2. So that's simply 5 over 2. But the question says, give your answer as a mixed number, just like in the case of 1 whole 5 over 6, right? So we're not just going to leave the answer as 5 over 2. So the question is, what's 5 divided by 2? We know that it's not perfect division, right? So 5 divided by 2 is going to be 2 remainder 1, because 2 times 2 is 4, but we need an extra 1, right? So that's 2 remainder what? That's 1, and then all over 2. And then based on what I explained earlier, in the case of 1 whole 5 over 6, what we have is 6 times 1 plus 5, which is 11 over 6. And in the case of 2 whole half, and that's going to be 2 times 2, which is 4 plus 1, 5. So simply the division, so you divide and look for the closest factor, right? And then you get the remainder. So 2, in this case, the remainder was 1 because we needed 1 to give a 5, and then 1 over 2. So that's the value. 2 whole 1 over 2. Alright? Nice. Okay, let's move on. Next question says, diagram shows triangle ABC. M is the midpoint of AC. Right? Triangle ABC is rotated 180 degrees about center M. The image is and the original triangle together form a quadrilateral ABCD. Write down the mathematical name of the quadrilateral ABCD. So let's go right here. So the question says that ABC is rotated 180 degrees about the center. So if an object should be rotated 180 degrees, it's just like a flip, right? Just like if you get an object and then flip it over, right? That's like a mirror of the object if we should draw that out, right? Because that's 180 degrees. Just like if we have this object over here, and then we're gonna flip it over, right? Through a straight line, which is what? 180 degrees. So that if the object was initially here, it's now down here. So we then get the image. Looking at this part, that's ABC. Focus is gonna be tracing that out. We're gonna have this to get the mirror. Pay close attention, right? So this is mirroring out to this side ABC, right? And then in this case, what do we have next? If we look at the side AB, you can see this ABC. So we're now reflecting this side AB, right? Did you see that? Right. Okay. So that's it. We've reflected all. So you see that we end up with a point here, D. So a quadrilateral has been formed. So you can see it's still same as what was here initially, but there's kind of like a flip, right? So the question says, write down the mathematical name of the quadrilateral ABCD. So one thing you could notice here is that the length of this side is going to be equal to the length, because it's just a simple flip. The length of this side is equal to the length of this side, and the length of this side is going to be equal to this length, right? And what does that fit into? And first of all, you can see that the angle here is 112 degrees. So we could not say that this is a rectangle, right? Because if it's a rectangle, what happens there? It means that each angle is 90 degrees. So that implies that it's a parallelogram. Why? Because we have two opposite sides equal, to this side and this side equal, this side and this side equal, right? It's not a rhombus because in the case of a rhombus, all sides are going to be equal, right? Okay, so the correct answer to this is parallelogram. And then if you have the sketch of a parallelogram, you see that it has parallel sides, right? So we could say this is parallel to this, right? And this side is parallel to this side. That is why it's important to know the properties of parallel lines. And if you know the properties of parallel lines, one of the properties there is that alternating angles are equal, right? So in this case, if you have an angle here, A, then here is also going to be equal to A. So in this case of 44, if here is 44, that is in conjecture with what we have. So if here is 44, here is also 44. And the question says, find angle BAD, right? So that's this angle B, right? And then remember A is over here, and then BAD, we called here D, right? BAD. So the question is, what's the angle here? What's the angle here? Okay, so that's it. Moving on. So this is a triangle at initial point, right? Over here we had 112, we had 44, and then we don't know what this is. And then you should remember that in a triangle, the sum of the angles sum up to 180 degrees. So we're going to have, let's call here x, right? So it's going to be x plus 112 plus 44 equals 180. So that's going to be x plus 150. That's 112 plus 44. That's 156, right? Equal to 180. And then x is equal to 180 negative 156, which is equal to 24. So that means x is 24. So you could replace that with 24. So BAD is simply going to be, so please do also show all your workings here, right? I just solved over there so that you could understand that as you're seeing the image, right? So angle BAD is simply the sum of 24 and 44. So 24 plus 44 is going to be equal to 68 degrees, which is angle BAD, right? Also do well to add the reasons that are implied here. So when you say, okay, you could come over here, let me be clear with this. So maybe you're solving this. You say angle CAD is equal to 44 degrees, and then in brackets you write alternating angles, right? So that you give reasons to every step you take. And then you move over to this side, you could say angle BAC, right? Which is what we got as 24. You could say BAC, right? Say BAC is equal to 180 minus 112 plus what? What was the other angle? 44. And at the end we had 24. And then in bracket, what are you going to say? Angles in a triangle, right? And then at the end of the day, we then have that angle BAD is equal to CAD plus BAC, right? Because those angles summed up to give us the angle BAD. So that's a proper way if you should report your answers in the exam, right? Okay, question 15 says, Shivu invests $750 in a savings account for 5 years. The account pays simple interest at a rate of 1.8% per year. Calculate the total interest she earns during the 5 years. So this is simple interest. And it's important you know that the simple interest formula, which says that the interest is equal to the principal times the rate times the time divided by 100, right? So we're looking for the total interest. So that's going to be I is equal to the principal. That's how much she invested, right? Or he invested. So that's going to be 750 multiplied by the rate, which is 1.8, right? And then times 1.8 multiplied by the time, which is 5 years, and then divided by 100. So we could cancel this out, right? And then 75 times 1.8 times 5 is going to be 675, and 675 divided by 10 is 67.5, so we could say $67.50, right? So that's the total interest she's going to earn during the 5 years. Okay, question 16 says we have 5x plus 7 is equal to 9x negative 13. Okay, so what is simply going to happen here is that we're going to subtract 9x from both sides, right? So that we have x on one side, we have constants on the other side. So if we subtract 9x, it's going to be 5x plus 7 is equal to 9x negative 3 negative 9x, then negative 9x. So 5x negative 9x is negative 4x. So negative 4x plus 7, this cancels out, is equal to negative 3. So we can then subtract 7. We can then subtract 7 on both sides. So that's going to be negative 4x plus 7, negative 7 is equal to negative 3, negative 7, right? And that's going to be negative 4x is equal to negative 10. And then negative 4x equals negative 10. We divide through by negative 4. Right? The negative cancels the negative, right? Negative, negative, positive. Then 10 divided 2 is 5. 4 divided 2 is 2. So x is equal to 5 over 2. We could say 2.5, right? Okay, so question 17 says, this is a graph, and they're asked for the equation of line L in the form y equal to mx plus c, right? Okay, so how do we do this? So this is a general equation of a line. So it's important that if you're to determine the equation of a line from its graph, all you simply need to do here is to first of all watch out where the line cuts the y-axis, right? And that's the value of c. So in this case, you can see this line, and you can see that it cut the y-axis at y equal to 1, right? So that implies that c is equal to 1. So we could simply say that y is equal to mx plus 1. Right? And then the next question now is, what's the value of m? M is simply the gradient of the line. And the gradient of the line is simple. It's simply the rate of change of the y-axis, the y, and then divided by the change in x. So in this case, you could simply construct a triangle here, right? You could simply construct a triangle here. And then we can have this a perfect triangle over here. And then we trace this down, right? And then we then calculate value of m by the change in y divided by the change in x. So you can see that the initial value of y, so we can say that y is equal to the initial value, the upper value, which is 2, right? Then minus the lower value, which is 1, divided by the change in x. So what's the higher value of x here? That's 3. And then the lower value here is 0, right? So 3 negative 0. And then 2 negative 1 is 1, right? And then divided by 3. So y is going to be equal to 1 over 3x plus 1. And then we could multiply by 3. Okay, the question says y equal to, so that's going to be 1 over 3x plus 1. So the next question says, on a grid, draw a line that is perpendicular to line L. Right? So when you're talking about perpendicular lines, that means that the angle between the lines sum to is 90 degrees, right? 90 degrees. So in this case, what we're going to have is drawing the line, and then in order to draw the line, we can, because the question says draw a line, right? Draw a line. So we are not asked to construct, so you could simply place your protractor over the line, right? And then measure 90 degrees. So what happens there, let's say you have a protractor and then you place a 90 degrees, and then you could just place it at any point, and then at that point you place that up, place that down, right? And then you make sure you use a ruler, and then you draw a straight line, right, through the point. Well, if you should want to construct, you could place pick two arbitrary points, and then you place an arc. You place that's there's no need for that. You could just use a protractor and a ruler, and that's all for that. Just ensure that the angles between the lines is 90 degrees. Okay, question 18 says a bar of chocolate costs $3 and a bag of sweets costs $5. Write down an expression for the total cost in dollars of X bars of chocolate and Y bags of sweets. So we have a bar of chocolate costs $3, right? So and then we have X bars. So the total cost of the chocolate is going to be 3 times X, right? Going to be 3 times the number of bars, and then plus that's getting the total cost, plus we have Y bags of sweets, and each bag of sweets costs $5, so that's going to be 5Y, right? 5 times Y. So what we have is 3X plus 5Y. So 3X plus 5Y dollars. That's what we actually do in the real sense. Okay, question 19 says, a bag contains these cards 1, 7, 3, 9, 4, 5, 2. One of the cards is picked at random. Find the probability that the number on the card is greater than 3. So we have how many numbers here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we then circle those numbers greater than 3. So what's that going to be? We have this is greater than 3, this is greater than 3, this is greater than 3, this is greater than 3. All others are less. And then we have 3 here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4, which is the number of favorable outcomes divided by the number of total possible outcomes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 4 over 7 is the correct answer, right? That's the probability. Next question says a box contains 3 blue cards and 7 red cards. Kim picks 1 card at random, notes his colors, and then replaces it in the box. She then picks another card at random. Complete the tree diagram, right? So a box contains 3 blue cards, and then we have 7 red cards, right? So the probability of a blue card is simply 3 divided by the total number of cards, which is 10. 3 plus 7, 10. I have 3 over 10 here. So over here, for a red card, it's going to be what? 7, because we have 7 red cards divided by 7 plus 3, which is 7 over 10. So over here, the probability of a red is 7 over 10. And then over here, this is the second card, because this was the first card, right? First card. And then for the second card, we have 3 over 10, right? Because he's going to replace it back into the box. And if he puts back a blue card into the box, we're still going to have 3 cards there, right? And then the probability is 3 over 10, right? And then for a red, it's going to be what? It's going to be 7 over 10, right? So if he picks a blue the first time, right? He picks a blue the first time, and then if he picks a blue, he returns it, right? And then the second card he's going to pick is either blue or red. And if it's blue, 3 over 10. If it's red, 7 over 10. And then in the case of the red, if he picks a red, probability is 7 over 10. If it's blue, 3 over 10. And if it's red, that's 7 over 10. Right? Because he's going to return that one which he removed, right? And that's going to give us what we're meant to get. So next question says work out the probability that both of the cards Kim picks are blue. And then when you hear a question talking about both or and, right? The 2 events are occurring, and it's not an or situation. So the first card is going to be blue, and the second card is also going to be blue, right? So the probability is going to be blue the first time is 3 over 10, and then the second card blue is going to be still going to be 3 over 10. Right? Nice. Okay, so it's going to be 3 over 10. So when we're talking about and we're using the multiplication operation. So it's going to be 3 over 10 multiplied by 3 over 10, which is 9 over 10 times 10 is 100. And that's 9 over 100, or we could say 0.09. Okay, let's take the next question. The diagram shows a sector of a circle with radius r and sector angle 72. The arc length is 9.35 cm. calculate the value of r. So this is simple. The first, you know that the length of an arc length is calculated by theta over 360 multiplied by 2 pi r. All this came from the circumference, right? The circumference is 2 pi r. But we're now looking at the sector of that circumference. So that's, we get the angle, divide by 360, then times 2 pi r. So theta over 360 times 2 pi r is equal to 9.35, right? And then the angle here is 72. So we have 72 over 360 multiplied by 2 pi r is equal to 9.35. And you can see that 72 could go into cell to be 1, 360, 72 could go to be 5, right? So 2 pi r is equal to 9.35 multiplied by 5. And then if we divide through by 2 pi, that's going to be 9.35 times 5 is 46.75. And then divided by 2 pi, which is equal to 7.44, right? cm. And that's the radius, that's the value of r. Okay, next question. Question 21 says, this is the universal set 2, 4, 8, 9, 10, 12, and Q we have square numbers, and for R we have multiples of 4. So for the square numbers from the universal set we have 4 and 9, right? Because 4 is a square number because 2 times 2 is 4. 9 is a square number because 3 times 3 is 9, right? A number that multiplies itself tries to produce a number. That number is the square number. Then multiples of 4 from this set, we have 4, we have 8, we have 12, right? Because they are divisible by 4 without remainder, right? They are multiples of 4. 4 times 1, 4 times 2, 4 times 3, right? Nice. So we then write them out here. So for Q, this is for Q, this is for R. So, and then you can see that 2 and 10 were not included in Q and R. So we simply place that outside the box, 2 and 10. And then for the Q's, which Q and R, you can see that there's some similarities between the two. You can see that there's a 4 here and there's also a 4 here. So when you have a common element, you place that in between. So that's here. And then what we have here is 9, right? What we have here is 9. And then over here, what we have here is 8. And then we have 12 also, right? So this is completed. This is 4. That means 4 is in both Q and R, right? And this is 9, has 4 and 9. This is R, has 4, 8, and 12, right? So the next question says, write down the n of Q in the set R, right? And Q in the set R is simply the elements you could see in Q that you could also see in R, and that's simply 4. We've written down the elements of Q and R, and we saw a 4 and a 9. It's a square number, and then R 4, 8, 12, and then what we have here is 4, right? So that's the value, and that's the value, but we're asked for the number. So first of all, Q in the set R is 4, but the number of elements is what? 1, because we just have one element, which is 4. So 1. Okay. So next question says, find the highest common factor of 48 and 80. What you simply do, you could factorize this. You could factor this. So 2 here 24, 2 here 12, 2 here 6, 2 here 3, 3 here 1, 2 here 40, 2 here 20, 2 here 10, 2 here 5, 5 here 1. Right? So we could write 48 as, you can see that 2 occurs 4 times, right? So that's 2 to the power 4 multiplied by 3. And then for 80, we have 2 to the power 4 multiplied by 5, right? So 80, 2 to the power 4 times 5. And then for the other, we have 48, which is 2 to the power 4 times 5, 3. So the highest common factor that can divide 80 and 48 without remainder, right, is going to be 2 to the power 4, 2 to the power 4. Right, because 5 and 3, we're not going to include it because they're not the same. They're not common, right? So it's simply 2 to the power 4, which is equal to 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which is 16. Okay, then the last question says, solve the simultaneous equations, and you must show all your workings. So we have 3x plus 5y equal to 23. and 6x negative 4y to be equal to 11. So you could see that we could do some elimination here, right? And we could simply do it. Let's say this is equation 1, this is equation 2, right? So we could multiply the first equation by 2, right? So that we can get a 6x just like equation 2. So if we multiply equation 1 by 2, what we're going to have is going to be 6x, because 3x times 2 is 6x. Then 5y times 2 is 10y, and 23 times 2 is 46. Then second equation, we have 6x negative 4y equal to 11. So at this point, we can then subtract the two equations. Now let's call this equation 3, equation 2. So if we subtract 6x negative 6x is 0, 10y negative 4y, that's negative positive, is equal to 46 negative 11 is 35. So 10y plus 4y is 14y equal to 35. And then to get the value of y, we divide 3 by 14. So 7 goes to 35 to give us 5, and then goes to 14 to give us 2. And 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So that implies that y is 2.5. Now the question now is, what is the value of x? Right? What is the value of x? So you could go into any of the equations and substitute the value, right? So we could say, we could pick this equation 6x negative 4y equal to 11, and then we substitute the value of y, and we have 6x negative 4 into 2.5 is equal to 11, right? And then 6x negative 4 times 2.5 is negative 10 equals 11, right? So 6x is equal to 21, because we're going to add 10 to both sides, right? Becomes 21. Then divide 3 by 6. Then when 3 goes to 21, we have 7. 3 goes to this, we have 2. And then 7 over 2 is 3.5, which is 3.5. So x is 3.5. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do well to like this video, share this video, and also do well to subscribe to this channel if you haven't. Thanks once again, and have a nice day.